How do I pick up artifacts in DECODE? The game piece this year is two differently colored, semi-compliant 5-inch balls. They look like wiffle balls, they have some holes in them. If you squeeze them, they have some amount of compression, which might be easier to intake. This year, you can hold multiple game pieces in one robot. Teams need to be careful about the amount of game pieces they possess, as holding too many can result in a penalty. There are two ways that teams can pick up game pieces this year. One is from the floor, where there are multiple game pieces available at any given time, and the other is from the human player station, where game pieces can be fed into the robot by human players. Both have pros and cons in strategy, and ways that you can design for them that are different. As with all intake mechanisms, teams should design to acquire game pieces intentionally over releasing them or storing them, so that you can get game pieces to an intentional location easier and much earlier in the process. Be sure to prototype ways that you can acquire game pieces before you start prototyping ways to put them intentionally in other places. The AndyMark starter robot acquires game pieces from the human player station. Be sure, if you're acquiring from the human player station, that you have a wide area that the human player can throw the ball into. This allows the human player to be slightly inaccurate, while still putting balls in a location that your robot knows it'll be. Last season, acquisition zones of robot were good to be small, meaning that you could only pick up one sample from one location at a time, and you needed to be precise about what you were picking up. That meant that claws and grabbers were much better suited for that game. However, this year, game pieces can be anywhere on the field, and you want that wide acquisition zone to be as large as possible so that you can get game pieces from anywhere. This means that if you're choosing to do an intake off the ground, you want a wide area that game pieces are able to be picked up from. If you're choosing to go from the human player station, that wide acquisition zone is still pretty good, because you want your human player to be slightly inaccurate sometimes because they are human. Our starter robot can hold up to 3 game pieces at a time, using the perforated poly, gravity, and the ability to feed in from the human player station. In order to store things in a robot, you have to have room to store them. One of the ways that the starter bot does this is by using a series of ramps to store an amount of game pieces that can be shot into the goal. Our robot uses this sheet of perforated poly here and uses gravity to feed it into the mechanism at the bottom. So once we've loaded it in from the human player station, this sheet of perforated poly keeps it in place so it can be loaded into our catapult right after. The perforated poly sheet is a really versatile way to get game pieces to the place where you want them. This robot uses a floor intake to pick up game pieces off of the ground. It uses our compliant stars in order to feed into a hopper at the top. Teams will want to experiment with different compliant stars and different durometers of compliant stars in order to figure out what works best for their team. Different colors mean different durometers, which means different squishiness. So you might find that a squishiness level of a little bit more compliant works best with these balls, but be sure to experiment and see what works best for you. This robot uses a ground intake in order to pick up game pieces from the ground. It also uses our compliant stars in order to funnel it into the place where it knows that it is. These compliant stars are our green compliant stars, which means they have one of the lightest durometers available. This means that they're going to bend a lot more than some of our other colors. Even though this game piece does have some compliance to it, it might be better to make your intake more compliant so that it can adjust and adapt to whatever the game piece is doing. These game pieces take up a lot of room in an 18 by 18 by 18 robot. Be sure to consult the manual about how many you can hold, and design your robot so that you can't hold too many. With this robot, sometimes we run into issues that we're holding too many game pieces. We want to be able to mechanically design something so that we don't draw fouls on the field. Another way of intaking that your team might find successful is using rubber bands and gears. This robot uses that method in order to intake things into the rest of the robot. Rubber bands provide enough compliance that the game piece doesn't have to be compliant. Once the game piece passes through this intake, it heads into a secondary part of the robot called the indexer. The indexer takes the ball and moves it from the intake to where it can be shot out of the outtake. This robot uses a polybelt and sushi roller indexer in order to move balls from the front of the intake into the indexer. Polybelt can be cut and welded to whatever length you need for your robot, and provides a high friction surface that a ball can roll around to ensure that it gets to the place that it wants to go. The surface of polybelt allows game pieces to slip, which means that even if you're running the polybelt underneath them, the game pieces are still going to roll on the top. This is important when the game piece reaches a final step of being held by compliant stars before it goes into our launcher. By allowing game pieces to slip instead of stalling out, it allows the motor to be much healthier and allows you to collect more game pieces as they go through the robot. This robot uses a style of roller called a vertical roller. Teams may find that positioning the rollers horizontally in the opposite direction may also work for them. A large part of designing a successful intake is knowing where your game piece will end up at the end of it. One thing that might help is that Mecanum Wheels aren't just for drive bases. They can be on your intake and help you funnel balls into a location that you know will be at the center of your chassis. Iterate, prototype, see what works with this game piece and the materials that you have. You can also look at previous years for inspiration. The FTC game in 2016 through 17 is very similar, as well as the FRC game in 2017 that used game pieces very similar to these. Be sure to read the manual and come up with a design that works for your team. Consider your resources like time, materials, and expertise in the area. Be sure to build a robot that works for you. And that is how you pick up artifacts in DECODE.